Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Atlantic CIL podcast. I'm your host, Donald Campbell, and I am here with my new friend, Michele. And Michele, how do you say your last name? I want to make sure I say it right.
It's pronounced Kreuzer.
Michele Kreuzer, who works with people with disabilities. She was found by one of my staff members who you listeners know, Jen Burke, and she has a great service. And we're going to talk about her journey, what she does, and her perspective on disability rights and disability justice. So it'll be a great conversation. Hi, Michele. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here today.
So I like starting, I always say people like to know like your origin story of like how you got into this disability services rights world. So I'm going to ask you, how did you get here? What would you tell people got you interested in disability services and how you got into this world?
Okay. Oh my goodness. What was a long time ago? It must have been 1992, 1993, where I was just at home. I was watching a TV show and they showed this boy and he was in a school setting, but there were more adults than children. And this boy was flailing about, very angry, did not want to do the work that was in front of him. And then it fast forwarded and it showed this boy sitting, doing his work. And I was just utterly blown away by it. And the person I was sitting with, I said, "Oh, that's what I want to do." I started college classes, but they were just liberal arts classes. I had no idea. I said, "That's it. That's what I want to do." And he said, "Are we watching the same TV show?" I said, "No." I said, "See the difference that those adults made in that child's life?" I said, "That's what I want. That's what I want to do." And so right then I decided to shift my major to child development. And I have been working with individuals with disabilities since, probably 1997, 1998. I was a job coach, I loved that. I worked at the Ability Center in Westville, working with individuals with disabilities. And then it went on to me becoming a special education teacher, and it rolls on from there.
Yeah. So what do you do now? Explain to the audience what you do now, so they can get an idea.
Yes. So I just started my own business last year. It's called BEEhavior Budz. And I work with children, parents, teachers, any staff that works with children. I offer coaching strategies. I work with children to really improve and increase that communication. And then the staff training.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think the staff training is so important because I know as somebody with a disability, I have cerebral palsy. I think this is changing now, but often it was placed on the person, at least the person with the disability, who had to adjust to like the people around him. And like, especially with a behavioral disability, I think, that affects your behavior. It was always like, and I saw this when I was in school, even if I wasn't the person with the disability, I was sometimes around other people with disabilities many times, and it was the burden sometimes was, I thought, too much placed on the student. And a lot of it is about your reaction to the disability. So talk about that, why the staff training part is so important.
Wow. Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said reaction. So I was a special education teacher for 20 years, and I'm a lifelong learner, always learning as much as I could to help my students. And afterwards, I became a BCBA, so a behavior specialist. And after I was a teacher, I went back into the classroom, but working for a private company. And I felt like it was very reaction, instead of taking a proactive approach, we were taking a reactive approach. And I felt that was really the key that was missing. I was going into classrooms once the behavior was escalated. Right. And I thought, well, now we have to wait for the behavior to de-escalate, and let's really work with the teachers to be more proactive in this. Because I mean, honestly, being a teacher, I learned a lot, but there was a lot of training that I didn't have until afterwards, really understanding how behaviors, what behaviors mean, all
Right.
behavior is some kind of communication. So let's figure out what that child is trying to communicate to us. So then we can help that child to, in a more appropriate way, communicate their needs and their wants. And so that's why I felt like that piece was missing. And that is, I love going in and helping adults that are working with children.
Right. So talk about that. What advice would you give somebody in, because there are just many types of disabilities where people sometimes struggle with how they should react to certain things. But a lot of times it's about learning that person's triggers and learning about what upsets them. And then I find that once you understand that, you kind of can understand better why they're upset. Like you kind of get why they're upset instead of looking at it like, oh my God, they're acting so outrageously or inappropriately or whatever label we want to give it. Like you got to really see things from their perspective and talk about that and how to do that.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's one of the very first things that I talk to when I'm meeting with staff is we really need to back up. And you had mentioned triggers. We're going to back up and see why this child is behaving in the way they are. So there's always a reason for that behavior. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at it kind of through a different lens. I'm looking at what is that function of behavior, because there's four main reasons for that behavior. Is that child trying to escape something, trying to get attention? Is there a tangible, is there something they want, whether it's an activity or a food or, something like that? Or is it a sensory piece? So when we really kind of back up a little bit and find out why that behavior is happening, then we can help that child with the finding that appropriate behavior to communicate that need. So it's really about kind of rewinding everything. A lot of times people will say, well, Michele, there's my child is having an outburst. What do I do? Well, there's really, I don't know. Let's back up a little bit, because I could say what to do. And I mean, obviously, there's some things we want to remain calm. We want
Right.
to, of course, there's certain things that I can recommend, but to really give true strategies in how to respond to a behavior, we need to find out why that behavior is happening. And so I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, you got to really break it down. And I know offline you talked about how you go to the environment oftentimes that the behavior is in. And talk about that house, because I don't think people sometimes think, again, it's all the child, maybe it's in a school setting, I don't know why they're acting like this, but it could be the environment, what they're surrounded by. And we're all affected, disability or not, by the environment we're in. I get more anxious in crowds. I don't like crowds. And there are a lot of people like that. So talk about how environment really affects behavior, because I think we think about it, but we often don't when it comes to people with disabilities.
Yes, great point. So, a very common question I am asked is, where are you located? So, I live in Williamstown, but I go to wherever the behavior is happening because a child responds differently. So, if I were to, you think of a therapy session. Well, if I were to have a child come into my office, they're going to behave very differently than they would at home, or they would on the soccer field, or they would in school. So I really need to see that behavior in the environment that it is happening. And that's one thing that I felt was missing when I worked for companies. I worked for one company where I was only going in the home and working with that child to improve communication and, build skills. And then I worked for another company where I was only in the school. And I thought sometimes there was a disconnect. So I have worked in places like Total Turf in Pittman. I've worked on the soccer field. I've gone into different schools. And then, of course, in the home. Because when all of the adults, it's the environment, but it's also all of the adults that are in that child's life. And when everyone is communicating and working together as a team, you're going to see that improvement and that generalization into those environments so soon, like so much quicker than you would if you're just working in this,
Right.
one setting. And the other part is too, is so many times we can change that environment to help that child. Like one example I think of, and it's very simple. I was working with a family and the child was not staying in the bed. It was as if the child was, FOMO, fear of missing out. Like, wait a minute, what's going on? Like he didn't want to go to bed.
Mhm.
And one of the things we did was we changed where his bed was situated just so it was on the opposite wall. So he didn't see right down the hallway, and then putting in like a noise machine, the white noise, and just changing those things could improve behavior. So it's definitely that key piece is looking at that environment and what can we change within that environment to help the child and the adults in that child's life.
Yeah, being creative instead of getting frustrated by, and again, it goes back to understanding that it was about feeling left out, which is a normal human emotion. I mean, FOMO is a phrase because people have experienced that, especially in this age of social media and stuff. So it's just interesting again, breaking it down why this person is upset and what is affecting their behavior. What are some? I know it's hard. You're exactly right. I always say that too when people ask me, "How can you help my, somebody with a disability or me?" And it's like, well, everybody's situation is different, so I have to, really get to know you. But what are some, if you have any kind of basic tips when you're dealing with somebody with more, challenging behaviors that you like? What is the importance about remaining calm? Like, it's not just a nice thing to do, it's a better strategy. So, what are some basic tips if somebody asks you, like, what would you tell them?
Mhm. So, well, I do work with younger children. I work with children from the age. I do have a few teenagers right now, but my area of expertise is really 2 to 10. And so, a very common behavior that parents ask me about, say tantrums or outbursts. And so, you had said remaining calm. A lot of times, talking like just calmly lowering your volume, even as the child is getting louder. And what happens so often is when a child is yelling, we also tend to
Mhm.
yell. Even if it's not a child, when you figure if you're in an argument with somebody or you're not happy and they raise their voice, typically we raise our voice and then they raise their voice.
Yeah.
And then so you can see the escalation happening. But when you actually like go down to a child's level and you lower your voice as you're talking to them, then typically they also will start to match your voice.
Right.
So it's really trying to get that child to de-escalate. Also, really, and this is hard because when you're in the middle of it, and it can be very stressful. So it's hard. But sometimes we need to give that child a minute and just say, okay, I understand you're upset. I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to come back. And it's
Right.
like kind of leaving, you want to make sure that child, depending upon the, what's going on. Of course, safety is always the top priority, but just giving a little bit of space and then coming back and saying, are you ready to talk? So that is so key. And the moment I tell parents that it's okay, like we're going to lose our patience, don't get upset with yourself because we're all human, you
Right.
try the best you can, but it's really kind of learning too of what is working and what isn't working. And I'm trying to think too, it's easier for me when I have a specific child or a specific behavior. There was one boy I was working with, and he would get very upset and he would walk up the stairs, stomping his feet, and he would slam the door, of course. And so, mom would yell, don't be disrespectful, don't slam that door, all of those things. And it's sometimes taking a step back. But we have to then teach that child, well, and this is the key. This is very important. A lot of times we're trying to fix that situation as an adult, whether it's a teacher or a parent or coach. We're trying to reason with a child when now they're upset. So what we want to do is we want to wait until they're not upset. Don't try to fix the problem in the middle of this, turmoil or this big emotion. That's not
Yeah.
the time to do it. It's really waiting and saying, okay, I understand you were upset. I understand you were mad. You have every right to be that. let's think of some things that you can do. I always tell parents, let's think about what we want the child to do or what we want to see. So instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, we want to say, okay, it's okay to be mad. This is what you can do, and really give that child those tools.
That's a great point. And I think it goes back to something I always remind myself about anybody, which is you can't tell people how to feel. And I think that, sometimes, like you said, we escalated and we were in a situation, we're all human and this happens to everybody. You say things like, you shouldn't be upset. And it's like, wait, you can't tell people not to be upset, or you shouldn't feel that way. It's like, wait a minute, you can't tell somebody not to feel that. And that puts anybody, disabled, not disabled, kid, not kid. Now we're on the defensive because now I got to prove to you that I can be upset and you did upset me. So that's what you were just talking about, how to acknowledge that feeling. And sometimes, like you said, reset. Like, all right, have that feeling, take a breath. Like you said, make sure they're safe, but go and, give them some time. Because think about it logically, like all people, it's hard to solve any issue when somebody's on top of you, like, and giving you, and saying, we need to fix this. Sometimes you need a moment. Sometimes you need a moment. So and also acknowledging the autonomy of that child too is sometimes good. Like, I get that you're a person and you're entitled to feel that way. So kind of talk about that, the importance of also sometimes you can't fix it. I think that's a big thing in our field too, is everybody wants to fix everything real fast. And sometimes there is no easy answer to everything. So talk about kind of how it's a process and not just like, all right, we're gonna get in there, tell that child what they need to do, and we're done. And we're done. So talk about
Oh, yes. Oh, 100%. Yes. Uh, Behavior change takes time. It really takes time. And another common question that I'm asked is, well, are you working with the child or are you working with the parent or the teacher? And the answer is yes. If we think of behavior as a three-step process, like that A, B, C, the B being the behavior, there's the antecedent or what happened right before that. And then there's also the consequence or just what follows it, not
right,
not a punishment consequence.
right,
But like, so the reason why I bring this up is because the child has that behavior, but a lot of times the adult in their life can impact that behavior either before it happens, like when they anticipate there being an issue, and then of course how they respond to that behavior. But all of those things in that process are a habit, and it when we have been doing something for a long time, it's hard to change that behavior. So even with a child, when things are going really well, like say a child starts to respond to, these techniques,
right,
these strategies, and you're building these skills and giving them replacement, skills to, something else to do. Sometimes there could be a bad day, child reverts back. And then a lot of times, what does the parent or the adult do? We then tend to respond back to our old habits. So it takes time. Behavior change is not quick. Sometimes I hear, well, that worked great until it didn't. Well, behavior change isn't always improving or always, decreasing in seeing that. It's kind of, a zigzag pattern. There's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. We're going to see times where things are going great. And it really takes time and consistency.
right. And I'm always amazed. I'm always like, I always want to always pause and say this, like the way, the way we frame people with disabilities and their issues sometimes is very interesting because it's like, oh, it was working until we had that bad day. Well, what human doesn't have a bad day? And like, if you have a bad day and in doubt and lose your cool, like nobody sits there and goes, oh, it's all failure and it's not working. Sometimes, when I hear parents and caretakers in the job field talk about, well, I don't want my person with a disability to get a job because they might lose it and get fired. I always say, well, people without disabilities get fired all the time. It doesn't mean that like they're a failure. Like, why are people without disabilities allowed to have bad days? Why are people without disabilities allowed to have failures too. So just because I'm just re-emphasizing your point that just because it's not perfect all the time doesn't mean it's not working or worth doing.
Absolutely. And I do think too, sometimes there's things going on that we just don't see. If I'm, a staff member that's working with a child and they seem to have a really bad day and I don't know what's happening, well, we don't know what led up to that. Maybe they had a rough morning, maybe they didn't sleep well. Anything could have happened. Maybe they didn't eat breakfast that morning. So a lot of times there's so much more than we're not seeing as to why maybe this bad day or moment happened. And I love how you mentioned that sometimes people say, oh well, maybe they shouldn't get a job. I really There's always learning that can take place and really shaping that behavior. And I do see sometimes people, they want to help someone with a disability so much that sometimes they do too much.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
it's kind of like, okay, well, this is what, this individual can do. Let's meet him here and just like help him to get to that next level.
Yes.
Because you always want to see that improvement. And that's what we're looking for in all areas of life, really, just that little bit of improvement, that ongoing, upward trend.
Yeah, and people with disabilities have the right to, you learn from when things don't go well. Just like,
Absolutely.
sometimes it's like I had that bad day and that didn't go well. And then like you talk it out and it's like, oh, now I know what triggered you. Like you said, especially with children. Like I remember even when I was young, again with a disability, like so many little things can upset you. You could have a bad day at school. Somebody could have not sat with you at lunch. Somebody could have, especially in this day and age, I don't know how kids do it with social media and just there's so much that you as a caretaker or parent or guardian just may not see. And just to take that step back and go, well, maybe there's a reason they're having this behavior right now that has nothing to do with me. And I think that's hard too sometimes. It's like maybe it has nothing to do with you. Maybe it had nothing to do with what you're doing. So just kind of not taking it so personally. I think that's an important thing too. Just not taking it so personally, like it's a reflection on you all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. I've enjoyed this
So
conversation with you.
yeah, yeah, yes, and it's it's great to know that somebody like you is out there who I think really gets it. And maybe we'll kind of end on this point. Kind of, I always think the importance of self reflection. Again, of course, we got to talk about the child's behavior, but as you said, it's about their whole support system. So what is the challenge sometimes? Because sometimes it's harder for people to self reflect and think, what role am I playing in this behavior? So, kind of talk about that challenge and what people can do. And, like, I understand people aren't perfect. But that's an important part of life. Like, what am I doing to add fuel to this sometimes?
Right. No, it definitely is reflection. As parents, as teachers, working with, and sometimes that reflection, it doesn't have to be like what didn't go well. It's also
Right.
paying attention to what did go well. You
Yes.
know, so it's both sides of that coin. Like let's reward or praise when things went well. One thing, not to get off topic, I just thought of something I very often say to teachers and parents. Sometimes when we are nervous about a child responding a certain way, so we talked about those triggers and knowing what they are. Sometimes we get, like, oh my goodness, is this child going to react, have big emotions, right? And we kind of get nervous, like, oh, how are they going to respond? How's he going to respond? And then everything goes well. And all we do is kind of go, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, it didn't happen. But that is a moment to praise and acknowledge that child student did an excellent job. So it's really you finding those, because I truly believe like what you look for, you will find. And so
Right.
when you look hard enough, you're going to find it. So, look for those moments when you can acknowledge and praise that child for doing whatever it was, acting appropriately, like growing, improving, all of that. And then really kind of looking at it again and going, okay, that was, reflecting on that great positive behavior. when it's good, but then also when things don't go well, okay, what happened? What can I do better next time?
Yes, I think that
Like,
was an excellent point you just made, because you see that all the time where everybody will notice the quote unquote negative behavior and we'll have 87 discussions about the negative behavior. And oh my God, did you see that negative behavior? But if you have a real successful day, it's like, yeah, but the negative behavior is coming, instead of being like, well, we had a successful day. And I just know, as a person with a disability, this is important too. If anybody can hear that, like, there's so many discussions that happen around people with disabilities, especially when they're younger, where the people don't think or forget that the person with the disability hears everything you're saying. And I just remember I would sit there and be young and just people talking about me without including me. But I knew what was going on, and I knew what they were talking about, even when they would like whisper and stuff. I'm like, I know you're talking about me. Like, so really talk about that too. And I know we were just having such a great conversation, but of including the person too that you're talking
right.
about when you're in that team, because people with disabilities know when you're talking about them and they know themselves better than you do. So
No,
it's just hard.
it's so true, Donald. That is one thing I talk to. So before I work with a family, I explain that I do not like to talk about a child in front of the child,
Yes.
because even when they're young, they are well aware that you are talking about them. And plus, I want the parent to be able to freely express their concerns. And you want to be careful. So the first time I meet with a parent, I prefer the child not be there,
Right.
just so they can, but then also depending upon the age of that child, definitely including them. There was one boy that I wanted to create kind of like a calming, like a little bin where we called it his favorite things, where when he was experiencing all of this emotion and didn't know what to do with it, and he knew he needed to kind of calm down, he was actually the same boy that would go in his room and just like
Right.
slam the door because he needed some space.
Yes.
And so we talked to him, like, what are some things, like, these are some ideas of how you can calm down, but what do you like? What do you want to do? So it's not about us telling a child, okay, this is what we can do for you to calm down.
Right. This is what will calm you down.
Exactly. Doesn't that sound crazy? But sometimes it happens. So it's really having that child as a part of the plan.
Getting
100%.
buy-in, getting buy-in.
Oh,
Even at a young age, you can get some buy-in. And I just think it's so important. And also, you just want to send the message to the person with the disability too, that like they have a part to play in this too. So that's what I always tell parents and caregivers too. If you're telling them that they don't have to deal with this or that they don't have any part in this, don't be surprised when they're older and they're saying, why do you want me to have any part in this? You've been telling me for years I don't have to do it. So I just think it's so important what you're doing. And I love this conversation. We're very much on the same page philosophically about things. And I think it's great knowing that you're out there. Is there how can people check out your services if they're interested? Where can people go? And we'll put it in our description on the podcast.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I have a website. It's www.behaviorbudz.com. It's BUDZ. And my phone number is 609-774-8713.
Yes, and it's good to know that resources are out there, and there are. It is. I love what Michele said, and I just love her general philosophy. Like, there is no easy answer, and there is no. It's not like you're going to go to Michele's office and it's going to be like, oh, all our problems are solved. And I think the first thing is to just reframe it as not a problem and learning how to support your person in dealing with life. So I just think it's a really important thing. So thank you so much, Michele, for taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much, Donald.
You're welcome. See you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.